The rain fell in steady, grey sheets against the large windows of the Gilded Bean, blurring the historic Boston street into a watercolour of wet cobblestones and autumn leaves. Inside, however, a golden warmth radiated from every corner. The air was thick with the rich scent of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries, a comforting aroma that mingled with the low, happy murmur of conversations. Couples leaned in close over steaming mugs, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of table lamps, while small groups of friends shared laughter that was absorbed by the dark wood paneling and shelves of well-loved books. It was the kind of place designed for connection, a cozy sanctuary from the melancholy weather outside. Every detail, from the clink of ceramic on saucers to the gentle hiss of the espresso machine, created an atmosphere of intimate belonging, a stark and almost cruel contrast to the solitary island one person occupied within it. At a small table for two, Claire sat alone, a picture of composed patience that was beginning to fray at the edges. Her tailored blazer was immaculate, her dark hair styled in a way that suggested effortless control, but her polite smile never quite reached her eyes. For 30 minutes she had nursed a single cup of black coffee, the bitter taste a fitting companion to her thoughts. Each time the bell above the door chimed, her gaze would flicker up with a flash of hope that was immediately extinguished. The empty chair across from her felt less like an absence and more like a judgment, a confirmation of the belief she held deep within her, that this entire endeavor was a fool's errand. She had allowed a well-meaning friend to push her into this blind date, and now the familiar sting of rejection was solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. This was a waste of her valuable time. Just as she placed a few dollars on the table and began to slide her purse onto her shoulder, a small movement caught her eye. Two little girls, no older than 7, stood beside her table, looking up at her with an unnerving directness. They were identical, dressed in matching bright yellow raincoats that seemed to bring a private ray of sunshine into the cafe. Their large, brown eyes held a mixture of childhood curiosity and a seriousness that felt far beyond their years. One of them, slightly bolder than her sister, took a small step forward, her hands clasped behind her back. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. "Are you waiting for our dad? He said he was meeting a pretty lady here." The words hung in the air, a simple, innocent question that landed with the force of a physical blow, instantly silencing the cynical monologue running through Claire's mind. All the frustration, the carefully constructed walls of bitter resignation Claire had spent the last half-hour reinforcing, crumbled in an instant. She stared at the two girls, their expectant faces turned up to hers, and felt a wave of disarming confusion wash over her. The sting of being stood up was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a powerful, unfamiliar warmth emanating from their guileless hope. They weren't just asking a question, they were extending a connection, completely unaware of the turmoil they had just interrupted. Her practiced, polite smile faltered, replaced by a genuine bewilderment. She was utterly speechless, caught in a silent space between her hardened reality and their innocent faith. It's moments like these, so raw and unexpected, that truly show us who we are. If this story resonates with you, please consider subscribing, because your support helps us continue to bring these powerful human experiences to light. The moment was broken by the frantic chime of the bell above the door. A man stood there, dripping rain onto the welcome mat, his hair plastered to his forehead and his expression a mask of pure panic. He was older than Claire had expected, maybe 40, with kind lines etched around his eyes that were currently wide with distress. His gaze darted around the cafe before landing on the two small figures in yellow raincoats. A wave of relief, followed immediately by profound embarrassment, washed over his face as he hurried toward them and to Claire. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice breathless. "My tire went flat on the bridge in the pouring rain." I tried to call the cafe. My phone died. Lily, Grace, you weren't supposed to bother the nice lady. He looked from his daughters to Claire, his apology genuine and deeply flustered, a world away from the careless indifference she had imagined. Claire's carefully constructed fortress of indignation dissolved. In place of a self-absorbed man who couldn't be bothered to show up, she saw a single father, overwhelmed and doing his best. The anger she had been nursing felt petty and misplaced. She looked at the identical, worried faces of his daughters, then back at him, and the protective instinct that defined her professional life unexpectedly surfaced in her personal one. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that afternoon. "It's okay," she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign yet right. They were perfect little hostesses, your daughters. When he asked, hesitantly, if she might give him a second chance, she found herself agreeing without a second thought. The decision wasn't about him or the potential for romance. It was for the two little girls who had seen a pretty lady and hoped she was for their dad. Driving home through the slick, dark streets of Boston, the warmth ignited by the encounter began to cool, replaced by a familiar, chilling dread. It had been 5 years since Marcus. 5 years since she had come home to their shared apartment to find it half empty, his closets cleared out and a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't just the engagement he had broken, but the life they had built. He had drained their joint savings account, the one she had poured her own inheritance into, to fund a new life with someone else. The betrayal was so absolute, so devastating, it had hollowed her out, leaving behind a permanent distrust not in others, but in her own ability to judge character. She had been so wrong about him, so completely and utterly blind, and she vowed never to make that mistake again. That vow had become the bedrock of her new existence. She poured every ounce of her energy, every dollar she had left, into building her veterinary clinic from the ground up. The clinic was her sanctuary, a place where logic, science, and compassion reigned. Animals were beautifully simple. Their love was honest, their pain was real, and their gratitude was pure. They couldn't lie or deceive, they couldn't promise a future and then steal it away in the dead of night. Her success became her armor, her competence a shield. She healed broken bones and soothed frightened animals, finding a profound sense of purpose in mending creatures who couldn't hurt her the way a person could. Her life was orderly, controlled, and safe. It was also profoundly lonely, a fact she refused to acknowledge. Ethan and his daughters were a direct threat to that carefully controlled safety. They represented a world of messy, unpredictable emotions she had long since outlawed. Yet, the memory of their hopeful faces at the cafe table kept replaying in her mind. They had disarmed her with their innocence, bypassing the cynical walls she had spent years constructing. It was a vulnerability she hadn't felt since before Marcus, a faint echo of the person she used to be, someone who believed in connection, who dared to hope. The thought was terrifying, a siren call luring her toward a shipwreck she had barely survived once before. She was caught between the rigid safety of her present and the undeniable pull of a future she had sworn off forever. Their first rescheduled meeting was not a date, but a trip to the Franklin Park Zoo on a crispy, sunny Saturday. Claire found herself feeling more at ease than she had in years. The conversation wasn't the stilted, interview-like exchange of a typical first date, but a chaotic and joyful flow directed by Lily and Grace. Claire was in her element, explaining the behavioral patterns of the red pandas and the social structure of the gorilla troop. She watched Ethan with his daughters, saw the gentle way he corrected them, the patience in his eyes as he answered their millionth question, and the deep, abiding love that radiated from him. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply being a father, a good father. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of interest that was aimed squarely at him. The true turning point came near the seal enclosure. "Grace, The quieter twin, who had been observing Claire all day with her serious old soul eyes, slipped her small hand into Claire's. The contact was tentative at first, a silent question. When Claire instinctively squeezed back, Grace's fingers tightened, a simple, trusting gesture that sent an unexpected jolt straight to Claire's guarded heart. Later, as they ate ice cream, Lily looked at her with a child's blunt curiosity and asked, "Do you have a mommy?" The question was innocent, but it hung in the air, heavy with unspoken loss. Claire saw the flicker of pain in Ethan's eyes before he gently explained that Claire's mom lived far away, skillfully navigating the sensitive territory. In that moment, Claire didn't just see a potential partner. She saw a family weathering a storm, and a part of her yearned to be their harbor. The external world, however, was not as easily charmed. A few weeks later, Ethan's mother-in-law, Helen, made a surprise visit while Claire was over for dinner. Helen was a woman whose love for her granddaughters was fierce and absolute, manifesting as a thick layer of well-meaning but suffocating protectiveness. Her questions to Claire were polite on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of interrogation. She spoke of her late daughter, of the void she had left, and of how fragile the girls were. While her concern was understandable, her words made Claire feel like an unqualified applicant interviewing for a position she could never truly fill. She was an outsider, a potential source of more pain, and the weight of that judgment was a heavy burden to carry. That feeling of being an intruder was magnified tenfold the first time she visited Ethan's house. It was a warm, lived-in space, but it was also a shrine to a life that didn't include her. Photographs of a smiling, vibrant woman were on every mantel and bookshelf, Ethan's late wife, a constant, silent presence. Claire saw her favorite mug still in the kitchen, a half-finished painting on an easel in the study, and a collection of poetry books on the nightstand. Every object whispered of a love story she wasn't a part of. The home wasn't just a place where Ethan and the girls lived, it was a place where they still lived with a memory. A profound and painful insecurity began to take root in Claire's heart. How could she ever build something new in a space so completely filled by the past? The fear became a suffocating presence, a constant whisper in her ear telling her to run. Every step she took toward this family felt like a step onto thinner ice. The old trauma from her past betrayal roared back to life, telling her this was a foolish risk, that she was setting herself up for a fall far more devastating than the last one. This time, it wouldn't just be her heart on the line, but the hearts of two little girls. The thought of failing them, of inadvertently causing them more pain, was unbearable. She started pulling back, making excuses to cancel plans. Her messages becoming shorter, more distant. The fortress walls were going back up, brick by painful brick. This is the hardest part of healing, isn't it? Trying to convince your heart to trust again when your mind remembers the pain so clearly. If you understand that struggle, please subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these deeply human stories. Ethan, with a sensitivity that continually surprised her, seemed to understand her retreat without needing an explanation. He didn't pressure her or demand to know what was wrong. Instead, he gave her space. One evening, as she sat alone in her quiet, sterile apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from him. It wasn't a question or a plea, but a simple photograph. It was a drawing, rendered in the clumsy, earnest crayon strokes of a child. It depicted 4 stick figures under a bright yellow sun. 3 of them were tall, and one was holding hands with 2 smaller figures. Below it, in shaky block letters, was the name Grace. The unspoken message was devastatingly clear. In their world, she was already holding their hands. That simple drawing accomplished what no grand gesture or passionate speech ever could have. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future or an assurance that she would never get hurt. It was a quiet, profound statement of present-tense belonging. It showed her that while she was consumed with the fear of intruding, of not belonging, This little girl already saw her as part of their unit. Staring at the crayon drawing, Claire felt the icy grip of her fear begin to thaw. The risk was still there, as real and terrifying as ever, but for the first time, the potential reward, the warmth of a little girl's hand, the joy in a family's laughter, the quiet belonging of a crayon picture, felt infinitely greater. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in 5 years, she chose to step forward into the unknown, not away from it. A year to the day after a flat tire and 2 little girls in yellow raincoats had changed the course of her life, Claire found herself back at the Gilded Bean. The cafe was just as she remembered it, a haven of golden light and the rich aroma of coffee. But this time, the warmth outside matched the feeling inside. She sat across from Ethan at the very same table, but the empty chair that had once mocked her was now filled by a man whose gaze held a universe of affection. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Do you remember how you felt, sitting here that day?" he asked softly, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "I think about it all the time. I think about what we almost lost before we even had a chance to begin. I was a man living in a house full of memories, just trying to keep my girls safe. I didn't know we weren't just surviving, we were waiting." His words settled in the quiet space between them, heavy with unspoken history. "I was terrified of you," Claire admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan shook his head, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "And I was terrified of what you represented, but you never tried to fit into the spaces someone else left behind. You walked in and showed us how much more room there was in our hearts than we ever imagined." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers, their intensity holding her captive. "You didn't come to fill a space, Claire. You didn't replace anything. You came and made us overflow. You taught my girls how to laugh with their whole bodies again. You taught me that a heart can be big enough for a beautiful past and an even more incredible future. You didn't just heal us, you made us whole in a new way." Just as the emotion of his words threatened to overwhelm her, a small movement near the counter caught her eye. Lily and Grace, no longer 7 but a year older, a year brighter, stood there, looking even more serious than they had that first day. They walked toward the table with a determined, synchronized gait, each holding a large, slightly wobbly piece of white poster board. Claire's breath caught in her throat. As they reached the table, they turned the signs around. Lily's, drawn in a rainbow of markers, asked in big, cheerful letters, "Will you marry our dad?" Beside her, Grace's sign, written in a single, careful shade of blue, held a question that shattered the last of Claire's defenses. "And us?" The 2 questions hung in the air, a perfect, devastating summary of everything she had feared and everything she now desperately wanted. Tears blurred her vision, hot and immediate, but they were not tears of fear or pain. They were tears of profound, soul-shaking relief. The fortress she had spent 5 years building had not just been breached, it had been lovingly dismantled and repurposed into the foundations of a home. She slid out of her chair and knelt on the floor of the cafe, bringing herself down to their level so she could look directly into their wide, hopeful eyes. Her voice was thick with emotion, but it was steady and clear as she looked from Lily to Grace. "Yes," she said, her gaze encompassing them both. "Yes, I will marry you." She then turned her tear-streaked face up to Ethan, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated love. "And yes," she added, her smile finally, completely reaching her eyes, "I will marry your dad." Ethan knelt beside her, and in the middle of the crowded cafe, the 4 of them came together in a tight embrace. A messy, tearful, beautiful tangle of arms and whispered assurances. The low murmur of conversations around them had faded into a respectful silence, replaced by a few soft claps and warm smiles from strangers who had witnessed the quiet miracle. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of coffee and the tangible warmth of belonging, Claire understood. Love wasn't about avoiding the risk of pain. It was about finding the people who made the risk worth taking. It's a powerful lesson to witness someone finding their way back to hope. Believing in stories like this is what keeps us going. And if you believe too, subscribing to our channel helps us share that faith with the world. Their wedding was not held in a grand cathedral or a lavish ballroom, but in the sun-dappled quiet of a public garden bursting with late spring roses. It was an affair of intimacy, witnessed only by a small circle of friends who had seen their journey unfold. The true ceremony, however, was not between Ethan and Claire, but among the four of them. Lily and Grace, dressed in simple white dresses with wildflower crowns in their hair, stood between them, each holding one of their hands. They didn't just scatter petals. They read their own vows, promises written in crayon on folded paper, pledging to always save Claire the corner brownie piece and to let her listen to her quiet music in the car. When Claire spoke her vows, she looked first at the girls, promising them a lifetime of fierce protection, unwavering support, and a mother's unconditional love, before turning to Ethan to promise him her heart. It was a foundation built not on two people, but on four pillars of love. Their new life settled into a rhythm of beautiful, ordinary moments that felt anything but. Claire brought home a three-legged terrier mix from her clinic, a nervous creature that the girls patiently coaxed out of its shell, and she found a deeper joy in teaching her daughters compassion than she ever had in just practicing it. Ethan began clearing out his study, not to erase the past, but to make room for the future, sketching designs for a glass-walled extension that would become Claire's home office, a space for her that was entirely new. Evenings were no longer silent voids, but a chaotic symphony of homework questions, stories about school, and the four of them piled onto the sofa, a tangle of limbs and shared blankets. Claire learned that a home wasn't defined by the quiet order she had once craved, but by the happy, loving mess of a life being lived to its fullest. 3 years after that fateful rainy day, they found themselves back at the Gilded Bean. The cafe was unchanged, a timeless capsule of warmth and the familiar scent of coffee. But the scene at their small table was a universe away from its beginning. Lily and Grace, now 10, chatted excitedly about a school project, their youthful energy a vibrant counterpoint to the cafe's calm hum. In Claire's arms, a baby boy with Ethan's kind eyes slept peacefully, a new and perfect note in their family's harmony. She looked up and met Ethan's gaze across the table, a look filled with such profound admiration and contentment that it needed no words. He saw not the guarded, skeptical woman from their first meeting, but a wife and mother whose smile was genuine, whose eyes shone with a deep, serene happiness. He saw the woman who had made their world overflow. The final image was a portrait of quiet triumph, a complete and happy family seated where a broken hope had once sat alone. Claire's journey hadn't been about finding someone to fix her. It was about finding the courage to heal herself by letting love in all its unpredictable, messy, and beautiful forms. She understood now that family wasn't something you find, but something you build, brick by brick, with patience, forgiveness, and the brave decision to say yes to a future you cannot predict. Stories like this show us that the most beautiful chapters of our lives often begin right after we've convinced ourselves the book is over. If you believe in the power of a new beginning, please subscribe, because your support is what allows us to keep sharing these reminders of hope.